Hello, my name is Cynthia Castro, and today we'll be talking about community action and public policy. This is a presentation for my Sociology Senior Seminar Capstone course at Salem College. First, I want to talk about community action, starting with what is community action. Community action can be categorized as any activity that increases the understanding, engagement, and empowerment of communities in the design and delivery of local services. These services can be post mail, stamps, food stamps, or any other benefit that's given out by the government or by the local agencies. Community action can be started by members of the community, but it can also be done with the help from people outside of their community, meaning people who work for other organizations that aren't necessarily in that community but are aware of the issues there. Community action is important because it helps them support themselves while decreasing disparity among different communities. And this is an example of this would be lower income or even Hispanic or Black communities trying to fix the disparity between them and middle class white communities, which often have more services and more resources available to them. It is also important because it addresses the problems with funding and targeted police brutality, which we know disproportionately affect Black and Latino men. It also educates the community and public about the inequality that exists in these communities, which is essentially important in order to actually do something about these disparities. It also works towards change and solutions to the issues within the community itself, so the community learns to stand up for their rights and utilize whatever resources are available to them. And they get to choose and propose their own solutions and make sure that they are implemented. And this is very important because it takes into account how much more they are willing to help and to involve themselves in the progress of the community, while also keeping in mind that they are the most well-equipped people to come up and propose solutions, instead of just having it be taken up by mayors or governors or city officials who don't necessarily know the impacts of these issues or how to solve them without being part of the community. It is also important because the community itself gains control of the issues that they are victims of, by being aware that they can fight back and dismantle the system that oppresses them. So being aware of the issues is a very big step in this whole process, just because if the community doesn't know what systems or what officials are oppressing them and stopping them from achieving equality, then they don't know what to fight against or who to fight against. But once this becomes public knowledge and they become aware of it, it is easier to put a face or a target on how to fight back and how to get your rights back, which leads to every resistance starts small. The more people are aware of our current social problems, the more we can unite to solve them. Bigger numbers, bigger results. Another part of this is public policy. And public policy is the laws and principles by which we live and interact as a society, with various changes globally and demographically, which just basically means that public policy varies by state, by country, and even by municipalities. And it is important because we live by and through public policy, so if something within the policy isn't working for our community, then they should be allowed to fix that. It is also important because it keeps order in society and it aims to ensure equality among all citizens. Public policy is ever evolving and capable of providing protection for those who are often discriminated against in our society. However, the problem with this being that currently we are not in a society where public policy is equal or fair to everyone, and so if it's not working for us, we should be allowed to fight back and fight for a society in which our current culture can match that of the policy and not just benefit white straight males, which it has been doing since we have started. I've had engagement in community action and public policy in many ways, but one of the first ways in which I did this was I held an information session for those interested in how to intervene during ICE raids, along with the distribution of materials that inform victims of what their rights are in a situation like this and what resources are available to them. This event was on campus, It consisted of me showing a film documentary of what happens to a family once they are separated by ICE, and how traumatizing, painful, and honestly inhumane this treatment can be. It has very lasting repercussions that require therapy, and that's just going based on the best possible outcome, which is the family being reunited. This has been a very strong problem here in North Carolina recently, since the deportations and arrest of immigrants has risen 160% in the last 2 years. This is something I chose to involve myself with because it is an issue that is really close to me, and I thought that me fighting back here would be the start of what I decided to do later on in life. And so this distribution of materials and this bringing of awareness to campus was a start on a project that I will continue doing later on. Other things I've done is visits to fairs at schools, mostly elementary schools that have a large Hispanic population, in which I talked about the Hispanic League and all of the resources that they offer to this community. My work at the Hispanic League is basically contacting donors and scholarship recipients while also helping with all of their community events. And the Hispanic League is a non-for-profit organization that focuses on enriching the lives of Hispanic community here in Winston-Salem, and it is something that I've always wanted to do, and here locally is something that I didn't know existed. But bringing awareness to this organization and just to all the things that they do is very important for not only community action but public policy, because something that they do is community ID drives for those who cannot obtain state-issued IDs due to lack of proper documentation. For example, if you don't have a birth certificate that says that you were born here, or any other documents that state that you're a resident or a citizen in the United States, you're not able to issue an ID or issue a license or any other form of identification, which makes it even harder for people to have jobs, to, get any sort of public library card or any benefits socially. And these IDs were introduced by Hispanic League in order to have a valid form of identification for officers or for police that were detaining said person. And recently there's a case that was taken to Raleigh State Court to see if these IDs could be accepted statewide as a valid form of ID by sheriffs, police departments, and other public services. And this is a way that we have been trying to change public policy and hoping that this can change the opportunities and benefits and resources, of course, that this community has access to. Now, connections of this particular issue to Chapter 3 would be dealing with the classical perspective. The classical perspective was a rise in the ethic of individualism. It was more centralized on power and less power for institutions that enforced morality, like churches. It increased anonymity and potential for deviance. It had capitalistic views of success. Wealth was viewed as a staple for happiness. And not everyone starts off the same. Some people had to work twice as hard for half the profit, which viewed deviance as a way to catch up. For example, someone who was born to a well-off family already has the wealth, already has the money and the resources, but someone who sometimes doesn't get the same opportunities and therefore has to do a back alleyway or a not so legal way to catch up or have the same amount of resources or wealth as the other counterpart individual. This more individualistic approach meant less help from the government, which essentially means that the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. I connected this to public policy because a lot of laws have changed from help. A lot of people are being denied Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP, food stamps, and all these other resources and aid that the government is supposed to provide for those who are not able to provide on their own. And this has changed because we still view personal failure as an individualistic problem, when in reality it is affected by so many other things that deal with society, whether it be the color that someone was born, their race, their gender, whether it's a man or woman. There's still that disparity between genders, races, and honestly, the pay gap that exists between middle class, lower class, and upper class, which is still a very much individualistic, capitalistic view of the economy, which is no longer actually accurate, given the fact that a lot of people don't have the means to provide the life that we depict as successful and happy. Another connection I made to the readings was with Chapter 4, which dealt with the pathological perspective, which essentially meant seeking medical or psychological explanations for deviant behavior. In this case, deviants are portrayed as sick instead of menaces to society, but it also does selective protection, using sickness as an excuse for deviant actions, but not for every deviant in society. An example of this would be mass shooters in America are often labeled as mentally ill, depressed, or just not competent enough to withstand trial, and often getting away with their crimes. But these people are white, straight, male, and very often in the upper middle class or just the middle class. These people who are viewed as sick are disproportionately white and male, which reflect time and time again the discrimination that exists in our criminal justice system, which relates back to public policy and community action towards police brutality, targeted police brutality, and a disproportionate arrest of Black and Latino men compared to the white counterparts that commit the same crimes. This also depicts a failure of our current public policy and why it must be changed. It reflects that there is no justice for everyone the same way that there is for white men, and that there are only excuses for deviant behavior when they look white, men, and cis hetero. Another connection I had to add here because I thought it was very important was Chapter 7, which is the enemy perspective, which is presented as a discrepancy between socially engendered goals and the availability of legitimate goals to achieve them. Legitimate means to achieve them, sorry. The American dream is presented as an ideal and the true form of success, even in Latin American countries. However, there are no actual means to obtain citizenship, which pushes immigrants to enter the country illegally and thus be depicted as deviant immigrants or as lawbreakers. The westernization of Latin American countries has led to a shift in what is considered success, which is why I think the flux of immigrants has risen so much, is because there is this depiction of happiness and success being in the United States, following the American dream, having that picket White House fence with the 2 kids and the happy wife, but that is not available in other countries. That is not the case with countries that have dictators or corrupt leaders, and so they picture that as being only available and only achievable by the means of working here. But there is no way to come here legally without it taking years and years and thousands of dollars in resources, which are also not available, which is why they're trying to come here in the first place. And so the lack of means, the lack of availability for them to succeed pushes them towards this deviant act of crossing to another country illegally. And this pushes for a social disorganization due to the reorganization of a growing and changing society. We have become more diverse than before. There are more cultures than before. There are more languages than before. And all this change and growth has caused a reorganization in our society, which is also a side effect of crime and deviance. So the produced search of reorganization is sometimes through deviance itself, trying to search for the right society or the right community to fit into when all these changes are occurring around. The future plans for me personally include possibly work in a non-for-profit organization that focuses on helping these specific communities that I want to aid, and also being aware of what their issues are now. I feel more capable of aiding them and helping them in any way I can. There's a lot of exposure that happened thanks to this project, a lot of new knowledge found on not only the problems but also the resources available to these communities and what are the changes and the legal actions that they can take in order to ensure a successful future in this country. And something that really helped me was being aware of what policies limit these communities and what needs to be done to close the gap. And this whole experience gave me a clear understanding on what path to take with my career. And part of what a non-for-profit organization do is community action and community organizing. So this exposure was very beneficial for me just because I got to see what community action looked like, how it affects communities around us, and what exactly it entails to be a community organizer or community advocate. It has really helped me to put a face on the problems, on the issues, and deal with what criminal activities are related to these communities, just because seeing how they are depicted in society gives me a clearer understanding of why they're depicted that way, who is spreading these views, and why are they being so widely accepted and actually spread by other people. I believe that I can integrate this into my post-college career plans because I also pursue at some point to actually go for my master's degree, and I'm not sure whether I do social work or lean towards the more criminology side of it, but I would like to have something to do with immigration, agencies that discriminate against Black, Latino, and other minority men, especially tearing families apart and separating their dads and moms from the kids at the border. I think this is a really important issue at the moment that's happening here that a lot of people just forget about. You know, it's a one-time thing that it pops on your feed or it comes across your Facebook news, and yeah, you see it, you share an article or two, but it's a reoccurring problem, reoccurring dilemma that's happening in all of our borders. There are always more things to do, more issues to fix, and so I think that this whole experience served as an eye-opening search for what I want to do after graduation. It also helped me see how all this applies to the real world because it was my first outside experience of Salem College and not the whole world is like Salem. There is so much discrimination out there, and living in Salem shields you from that a bit, but once you go out in the real world you realize how pertinent it is that people discriminate and profile people all the time just based on their skin color. And this is something that I would really like to address as part of my future career plans outside of Salem.